I want to just acknowledge one of our deputy leaders who is as good a friend and as strong an advocate for business issues as you will find, and that's Tim Schmitz from Batavia, who came over with me today. So Tim, thank you for being here. I also, if you don't know this, and I know I'm somewhat preaching the choir, but you need to know this if you don't. When you have the NFIB and the Chamber coming together to put on an event, that is a good thing. With Kim Meisch with the NFIB and Doug Whitley and Todd Meisch with the Chamber, you have, in my opinion, two of the strongest business organizations representing you in the state capitol. Two of the strongest organizations you will find in Illinois government. You are fortunate to have them. They are very bright, they're capable, they're politically astute, and they know how to get things done. So thank you to your organizations, and thanks to the leadership of Kim, Todd, and Doug. They do an excellent, excellent job. I'm sure you've heard most of the discussion. It's about the budget. It's going to be about workers' comp. I think we're going to have a good bit of discussion in the days to come on education reform and on pension reform. And what I think is, and I'm not going to be partisan today, but what I think is a good thing that's going on in the state capitol now is a lot of things that you've been talking about and a lot of things that we have been talking about on the Republican side are starting to be discussed, and I think will ultimately happen. Whether it's workers' comp. Imagine if you thought about it a year or two ago or 3 or 4 years ago that we were going to actually potentially have a major reform in the workers' compensation system. That's happening because you and many of us and both chambers and the Republican side have been pushing and discussing and saying we've got to do something on workers' comp. Same on pensions, the same on budget, the same on education reform. So the persistence pays off. For a number of years there, we were a little frustrated. We weren't getting anywhere. People weren't listening. I think the public was. I think you were, and you said we're not going to give up. So it does pay off to be persistent and push. Chris talked about the budget from the Senate side. Let me just give you a quick perspective on the House side. And a strange thing's happening. The Speaker and I have not been the best of friends over the last few years. And if you follow state government, right or wrong, that's just the way it was. We had different approaches to how we wanted to get things done. He had a different approach than I did, and that's life. But about the day of the swearing in, I went up to him, and we have the potential to go through a long, drawn-out vote. And I went up to him and I said, Speaker, I don't think we need that vote. I will move to elect you by acclamation. The election's over. Let's move on, and let's take our political hats off, and let's get some things done. And we had a good talk that day. And we have continued to talk. And one of the areas where we decided we needed to make some changes, and this is a good thing, was the budget. The last 5 or 6, really the last 7 or 8 years, and again, I don't want to get too partisan, but the people running the place, the Democrats, said, we're going to decide how much we're going to spend, and if we have enough money, we'll try to get there, and if we don't, well, then so be it. Well, as a result of that, year in and year out, we ended up with a rather significant hole, because we were spending more money than we took in. Now, granted, the economy comes along and exacerbates the problem, but the reality is when you spend more money than you take in, you're going to have a problem. So the Speaker and I decided that we need to come to an agreement on how much revenue we have to spend. Doesn't mean we're going to spend that much, but we have to at least have some consensus between the two of us on what the available revenue is. And as Chris said, I'm not sure if she got the specific number, but the governor's budget address, he outlined a spending plan of $35 billion. And the problem with that is he provided for about $1.5 billion of borrowing to fill in the gap of how much he wanted to spend. I mean, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to you. It didn't make a whole lot of sense to us. So the Speaker and I said, let's agree that we will not spend, that we only have available to spend $33 billion. We can go below that, but we're not going to go above it. And if we have more revenue, we can use that to pay off our bills. This is something we haven't done in state government in the last 8 years I've been here, of determining the amount of money that you have available to spend. We then said, all right, we have appropriation committees. We have 5 of them. We are going to allow those 5 appropriation committees a certain percentage to spend and no more. So whether it's in education, human services, public safety, higher education, here's your percentage. You can't go over, you can certainly go under. It is positive in that respect because you know the universe, you know the parameters, and it empowers the members. It's another thing that hasn't been happening in this place for a number of years, driven by the leadership primarily the Speaker and the President, said, this is the budget, take it or leave it. You now have members saying, we are going to craft the budget, and where we can find areas to cut, we'll do, and we know we've got to get to a certain number. It is really, in your mind, a simple thing because it's how you operate your businesses. For state government for the last 8 years, it's a major move forward. It's a good thing. Now, I'm not sure where we're going to end up, but we have passed legislation that said we're not going to, there will be no revenue over 33, so we're locked in at that, and again, we can go lower. It's a very good move. The other area that no one wants to talk about, you've already talked about it, at least in the private sector, but it is the elephant in the room that has got to be discussed and is a very, very painful and difficult discussion. That's how we're going to handle our pensions for current employees. We have 5 systems. We have state workers, we have university workers, we have teachers, we have members of the General Assembly, we have judges. We have an unfunded liability to those 5 systems of $80 billion. $80 billion. And that's for a variety of reasons. People live longer. So the system worked when people retired at age 63 and died at 65. That was good for the pensions. I guess we can blame the medical community for people living longer. We're going to go after them on some other things. But the bottom line is when you live longer, it adversely affects the pension system. And when you do not adjust, it adversely affects it in a big way. You couple that with the state not making payments into the pension system, and you hear a lot about that, but there's one just kind of qualifier to that. What happened down here, and it's like a lot of what we do it, and we say we'll worry about it down the road. So what would happen is when money was not put into the pension system, which was a huge mistake, all right, I want to be sure I'm real clear, it was a huge mistake, something we didn't support, but it was spent in other areas. So when you hear someone say, well, it's the state's fault they didn't put money in, well, we saw money spent in other areas. So you're going to hear a lot from the education community, but it's not the sole fund that's in trouble. But what would happen is more money that year would go into the general state aid fund, which means more money for teachers at the local level. So that's why you saw groups in Springfield not complaining so much about pensions not getting paid, knowing they'd worry about it down the road because there was more money for salaries. And then the other thing you saw is you saw enhancements and you saw sweeteners, where you saw at one point pensions had a COLA of 2%. Then there was a bill that allowed them to go to 3%. Then there was a bill that allowed that to be compounded on an annual basis as opposed to simple interest. So what the significance, for instance, of a 3% COLA that compounds annually means that if you are a retiree in the state of Illinois and you live 25 years, your pension will double. Your pension will double. It's the beauty, or not so beauty, of compounding interest. So we have this huge problem. And you say, well, does it really affect me? We just saw a tax increase at 67% pass. That raises about $7 billion a year. The pension payment this year is $4.5 billion. Because there was borrowing the last 2 years to make the pension payment, and we have debt service of $2.5 billion, there goes your tax increase to take care of pensions. And so what happened here, I'm giving you a long story on this, but it's good to know the background. In 1995, because some of this had started to percolate, Governor Edgar said we need to create, and Governor Edgar, to his credit, did, we need to create an amortization schedule to take care of this unfunded liability, and we will pay for 50 years a certain amount, so we'll be at 90% funded, like many in the private sector do. So this year, that payment is about $4.5 billion for the unfunded liability. It climbs to almost $20 billion out of GRF by 2045. $20 billion. So you're concerned about local schools getting more money. You're worried about human service providers. You're worried about substance abuse providers, whatever, who come in and say, we want more money. If we do nothing about pensions, no one's going to get anything. $33 billion is our budget this year. Might be less, might be high. We're going to pay $4.5 billion for pensions. It's our third highest obligation. Third highest obligation. Education, Medicaid, and pensions. The bottom line is we have no choice. We have to stabilize the pension systems so there's money down in the road for people who are current employees. And again, this is a difficult conversation because if you're a state employee, you've said, I've done everything I've been asked to do. If you're a teacher, you've made your contribution every paycheck. You've done nothing wrong. But if we let this go, and if we put our heads in the sand and don't address it now, it gets worse. and we will not be able to sustain the system we have. It's a very difficult discussion to have, but it's one we have to have. I'm pleased to say the Speaker and I are on the same page. We know we need to do something, and we are in the process of crafting a bill. And what we are looking at, because we have a Constitution that says you cannot diminish benefits. We say anything you've earned to date, we can't touch. But going forward, we can give you some options. You can stay in the current system and pay more. You can go into a 401 type play, or 401 or deferred comp plan, or you can go into what we refer to as a type 2, where you can stay longer and you get smaller COLA. There are three options, and we think constitutionally by giving options, it will withstand a court challenge. Know that whatever we do will end up in court. But the bigger issue, I think, is whether or not the state is a guarantor of the pension systems. And the Constitution is not so clear about that. And so for people that are going to say you can't do this and don't do it, it's not fair, you have to say to them, well, do you want a system in 15 or 20 or 25 years that's stable and is secure and is viable? So a big discussion that is going to take place and will not be received well by some, but it's one we have to have. The other option, as Chris said, is workers' comp reform. We're on that program as well. Again, I am having some meetings with my friends on the other side of the aisle, and I hope we can come together relatively soon on that issue. The other issue that you're going to see some, I think, legislation on is education reform. How we handle tenure, how we handle dismissal, how we judge performance, and there'll be some discussion, I think, as well on not eliminating by any means the right to strike, but how to handle that situation. I think you may see that primarily in the city, but I'm not sure yet how far that goes. That is a bill that has not been finalized. I'm not in the middle of those negotiations, but it nevertheless is a big discussion going on. So a lot of good things going on, some discussion and debate that has to take place. I don't think we can ignore it any longer. We are a state that's struggling, but it's a state we all live in. We have businesses, we have homes, we have families, and we're not going to take our ball and bat and go somewhere else. I know that there's discussion about that, but I don't think we want to do that. So we are committed to making this better. I think we need to make it besides workers' comp. I think we still need to look at the regulatory side. I think we still need to look at the litigation side. We over-litigate and over-tax and over-regulate in this state, as we've said a long time. So we're committed to that. So with that, I'll be glad to, like Chris, to answer any questions